about this issue, and thank you.
Thank the gentlelady for her testimony. Thank you, Ms. Stoner, for your presence and for listening to, joining us and listening to Ms. Watson's statement. I want to thank Mr. Jordan for being here. You're welcome to come back if you are able to from your busy schedule. Ms. Stoner, you're dismissed as a witness. We want to invite the other witnesses to come forward.
Thank you.
While the witnesses are coming forward, I'd like to make the introduction of our second panel. Mr. William Walsh is of counsel, Pepper Hamilton LLP, where he heads that office's Environmental Practice Group, and he's representing the American Dental Association. Before 1986, when he joined Pepper, Mr. Walsh served as Section Chief of the U.S. EPA, Office of Enforcement, as lead EPA counsel on the precedent-setting hazardous waste lawsuits brought against Occidental Chemical Corporation concerning Love Canal and related landfills. Next will be Mr. R. Stephen Brown, the Executive Director of the Environmental Council of the States, the National Nonpartisan Association of the States Environmental Agency Leaders. Mr. Brown helped form the Environmental Council of States in 1993. Previously, he worked with the Council of State Governments as its chief environmental staff and with private engineering firms in the Kentucky Environmental Agency. He has 34 years of experience in state environmental matters. As the chief executive of ECOS, Mr. Brown has been closely involved in its mercury policy matters for the last 10 years, including the work of the Quicksilver Caucus and the mercury policies of the association. Another witness that we were anticipating, Mr. Alfred Dubé, who is National Sales Manager of Somatex, had to cancel his appearance today due to death in the family. Without objection, I ask unanimous consent to include Mr. Dubé's statement in the record of hearing, and this committee sends its condolence to him upon the death in the family. Mr. Alexis Kane is an environmental scientist with the U.S. EPA Region 5 Air and Radiation Division. Mr. Kane holds a Master's in International Affairs from American University, Master's in Environmental Studies from Yale. He's been with the U.S. EPA for 15 years. He works on mercury control efforts, including as the U.S. co-lead from the Great Lakes Binational Toxic Strategy and on the development of mercury reduction strategies under the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration. He's testifying before the subcommittee on his own behalf, and his testimony is not in his official capacity, and he does not represent the positions of the EPA. I wanted to make sure that disclaimer is put out there. Mr. John Reindl, is that correct pronunciation, sir? Mr. Reindl is a retired professional engineer who worked for Dane County, Wisconsin as a recycling manager for many years, including on programs to reduce the flow of mercury to the environment from products. He's researched and written on mercury air emissions from crematoria. His reference paper on crematoria, which is updated on an ongoing basis, has over 130 references to both literature and discussions with people everywhere. The Mercury Policy Project was formed in 1998 and works to promote policies to eliminate mercury uses, reduce the export and trafficking of mercury, and significantly reduce mercury exposures at the local, national, and international levels, and that is certainly due in great part to the initiation work of Mr. John Reindl. Now, it's the policy of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to swear in all witnesses before they testify. I would ask that you rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that each of the witnesses has answered in the affirmative. I would ask that each witness give an oral summary of your testimony. Keep the summary, if you would, to 5 minutes in duration. Your complete written statement will be included in the hearing record. Mr. Walsh, you're our first witness on this panel. I ask that you proceed, and thank you for being here.
I'm William Walsh, outside counsel for the American Dental Association on amalgam wastewater issues. On behalf of the ADA, more than 157,000 member dentists, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee members for the opportunity to discuss the Memorandum of Understanding with EPA. Prior to that MOU, the ADA met periodically with EPA, urging a national voluntary program to reduce dental amalgam in wastewater and implement educational programs and take other actions. Even without amalgam separators, approximately 99% of the amalgam is captured either in the office by other parts of the plumbing system or in the sewage treatment plant, which captures prior to discharge into the rivers a substantial amount, 95% of the mercury that enters that's related to amalgam. Now let me make it clear, because my earlier testimony at the last hearing
model to estimate releases instead of measuring these releases directly. I think that there are several reasons that a model can be useful. First, a model can provide estimates, however rough, of sources that are difficult to measure directly, such as releases from the land application of sewage sludge. Second, a model can generate estimates of releases caused by particular products. Direct measurement, for instance, can give us an estimate of how much mercury is emitted by incinerators, but it requires a model to estimate how much of those emissions result from the disposal of a particular type of product. Third, a model allows us to predict the impact of various management options, for instance, to estimate the potential decline in mercury releases resulting from installation of amalgam separators. Finally, a model provides a check on emissions measurements and indicates where additional measurement may be warranted. I'd like to focus now on mercury emissions from crematories. In the case of these releases, EPA's estimate is that total nationwide emissions were 0.3 tons in 2005, based on extrapolating from emissions measurements. The model, however, estimates that these emissions are more than 2 tons per year, based on data on the average mercury content of fillings, the number of fillings that an average person has at the end of life, and the number of corpses that are cremated. As a general rule, there are good reasons to prioritize measured results over an output from a model. However, I believe that in this case, the model's results are more reliable. U.S. EPA's estimates are extrapolated from a small number of emissions tests at a single facility, which could generate a misleading result, given that we would expect releases per cremation to vary greatly, depending on the number of dental amalgam fillings in the particular corpse being cremated at the time that the measurements were being made. The hypothesis that emissions inventories may understate the significance of mercury emissions from crematories is supported by evidence from emissions testing in Europe, where there has been more testing done than has been the case in the United States. For instance, the National Emissions Inventory in the United Kingdom uses an emissions factor of 3 grams per cremation, while Norway and Sweden each use an emissions factor of 5 grams per cremation. U.S. EPA's emissions inventory implies emissions of 0.4 grams per cremation, far lower than the likely range suggested by the European evidence. The life cycle flow model implies emissions of 2.7 grams per cremation, which is more consistent with the European evidence. Given all the uncertainties, I certainly do not claim that the mercury flow model has produced a correct estimate of mercury emissions from human cremation. However, I believe that the evidence is strong that EPA's estimate understates emissions from this source category. I believe that an appropriate evaluation of all the available evidence would lead to an increase in EPA's estimate of mercury emissions from crematoria.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Randall, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Congresswoman Watson. My name is John Rindle. I'm a volunteer for the Mercury Policy Project because unfortunately Mr. Bender became ill and has been unable to attend. I do have 13 slides that I will go through very quickly since a lot of these topics have been covered already. If we could have the next slide, please. This chart, and it's repeated in the written testimony, shows the quantity of mercury used in 2004 and the quantity of mercury that is currently in products. As noted on the chart on the left, about 25% of all the mercury used in 2004 was in fact for dental amalgams, and as stated before by your chair, about 1,000 tons of mercury are currently in the teeth of people in the United States, by far the largest source of mercury in any products in the United States. Next slide, please. We believe that mercury from tooth fillings is one of the largest sources of mercury that is discharged from various sources to wastewater treatment plants. Since a typical amalgam has a lifetime of 10 to 20 years, we have to look not only at the mercury that is currently being used, but the mercury that was used, because those fillings will come out approximately 15 years later. And as has been noted before, mercury that escapes into the environment, regardless of what form it is going to be converted to methyl mercury, which is going to build up into fish and enter the human body. Next slide, please. We have gone over the memo of understanding several times before, so I will skip this slide. And in fact, the next slide talks about the memo of understanding even more, so I will skip that one as well. Thank you. EPA testified that there were 12 states that have mandatory agreements. We were aware of 11 of them. Obviously, if 11 states or 12 states have agreements, 38 or 39 do not have agreements. Next slide, please. What we find is that for a suitable best management practices program, these are the elements that need to be included. It needs to include the installation and proper management of amalgam separators, requiring the dentist to recycle their mercury, and requiring reporting to verify compliance. This chart will show the partial estimate of sales of mercury amalgam separators. The states in the white, which are the far right of those bar charts, shows those states without legislation or requirements, and the tall ones represent those states with legislation. Only 13% of amalgam separators have been sold in the non-regulated states, even though those are 38 to 39 states, 3 times the number of regulated states. The amount of amalgam separators is less than 1/7 of those otherwise sold. Next slide, please. Here's a comparison of the EPA's estimate of mercury releases from dental sources to the atmosphere compared to those represented by the Mercury Policy Project. As your chair mentioned before, the estimates of the Mercury Policy Project are 5 to 7 times larger than those estimates of EPA. And as you can see from the slide, there are several areas that EPA did not include any estimates whatsoever. Next slide, please. This shows a flow diagram that was originally developed by a Swedish chemical agency and was used actually as the basis for our mercury flow models throughout the United States. Next slide. My big focus, though, is going to be on cremation. This is the area that I have specialized in. And as we see from this chart, and again, it's in your written testimony, the number of cremations is expected to dramatically increase in the future. We believe that this is going to increase the amount of mercury that's emitted to the environment. And additionally, what is happening is because of improved dental care in this country, the dental community has really done a super job. More people are having more of their teeth when they pass away. But in those teeth, there are more dental restorations, that is, mercury fillings, and therefore we're going to have an increase in mercury emissions for 2 reasons. One is increased number of cremations, and the second is more dental restorations. The next slide, please. This shows a bunch of numbers, which is kind of hard to see on the wall, but if you look in your testimony, you will see that our estimates is that the amount of mercury will over double within the next 10 years as air emissions from cremations because of the combined impact of more cremations and more dental restorations. The last slide, please, is a summary. There's 7 to 9 metric tons of mercury released to the environment per year. That's growing rapidly. We don't feel that the premise of the MOU was based on true facts. We believe EPA should establish effluent guidelines for dental offices. We believe that their dental air emissions data should be updated, especially for cremation. We believe that EPA should regulate mercury emissions from crematoria, and we believe that EPA should maintain a transparent, open process to include the non-governmental organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reindl. Mr. Walsh, we're going to go to questions now. You testified that the ADA filed public comment in 2007 against bringing dentist offices under mandatory effluent guidelines. The reason to exempt dentists was, as you state, because dentists can and will act on their own. But isn't it true that nearly every state or local jurisdiction that has tried to get dentists to voluntarily adopt mercury separators has then chosen to mandate or threaten to mandate a separator requirement because dentists were not, in fact, acting in large numbers on their own?
Well, I think it's inherent in any voluntary program that I'm aware of that there is the implicit or explicit consideration that the next step is regulation. In the MOU, we specifically say that EPA and the states reserve that right. In fact, in the communications that the ADA uses to its members, it points out, as it must, to be honest and forthright with its members, that if they do not do a voluntary compliance, the likely next step is an enforcement.
So we're just some members waiting for mandatory?
There has been, I think, a very long education road to educate the dental professionals about this issue. When I was first retained by the ADA, there was back in 2001, very little knowledge of what the regulatory regime was. They were dentists. They had not been involved in many environmental issues. They also had some scientific issues about what was being said. A lot of people took the 50% numbers of what was going into the plant, POTW plants, and said that was what was coming out. We built a factual basis that showed that it was a problem that was significant in terms of the influent, that the benefits of recycling, and on a science basis, which professionals like the Dental Association and its members are understanding more, and we look at the data, and there were early failures, and the dental community was part of the reason for the failures. But if you look at the pattern, not only in the voluntary programs involving dentists, but other voluntary programs, because for 20 years, the Water Office has used voluntary programs in situations like this where there's a large number of small entities that have to be regulated, and it has mainly to do with their own resources and their own priorities. We thought that if we have a consistent message from the ADA, from the regulators, and those states or localities where there's either local conditions that are required more stringent, they should go ahead and do what they think is appropriate. We preserved all the rights to do that, but we think it actually will be quicker to do this on a voluntary basis, and we understand that if we are not successful, that a likely outcome is that EPA will issue a regulation.
Mr. Brown, would you like to respond to what Mr. Walsh said? And pull that mic close,
Sorry.
okay?
Yep.
Thanks.
Got it. Voluntary programs have a purpose and a place, and but our position is that their time as the solution has passed. We need to have EPA under the Clean Water Act exert its authority to issue a rule on this matter, and during the process when that rule is developed, before it is finalized, that takes years typically, that the voluntary programs can help educate dentists about their obligations and get some results before the rule actually comes to place.
Now, Mr. Walsh, you saw that chart on the wall, right?
I did, yes.
I mean, wasn't, the ones where, not that one, the chart that deals with the dentists seemingly responding when mandatory regulations are requiring adoption of mercury separators. I mean, I just wanted to ask you, because you've seen it, isn't that evidence that dentists respond when you have mandatory regulations?
Well, I think you need to look at, the individual
I'm
cases.
asking what you saw, not what I saw.
Well, what I saw is a number of different factual backgrounds. One of the charts shows, I believe, either Minnesota or Minneapolis and its voluntary program. That was a relatively successful voluntary program, and it was followed by agreement of the local dental association to go to a
Are you talking about
mandatory
Massachusetts?
No, I was talking about...
Take a look at that chart. I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because if you're talking about Massachusetts, they had a different reason for their compliance. In Massachusetts, this letter from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which I'll put into the record, says, quote, a big jump in Solmatex Inc. separator sales apparent in Mr. Dubé's exhibits starting 24 months prior to the effective date of Massachusetts regulations, which were adopted in 2006. This sales increase started in 2004, was concurrent with an innovative incentivized early compliance effort implemented by MassDep in concert with the development of state regulations requiring separator use. So we'll put that in the record without objection. Do you have any comment on that?
Without having read the details,
you know what? I'm going to ask my staff to take
as a
that
general
over.
matter, as I said in a few seconds ago, many of these programs, voluntary programs, some of them were do it voluntary within X number of years, or we're going to make it mandatory. In a couple of cases, they decided they didn't need to go to the mandatory case. Part and parcel of any of these voluntary kinds of programs is the implicit or explicit threat of there being a mandatory requirement.
But if there's no mandatory requirement in the offering, the voluntary compliance is going to be low, right?
That is true.
Okay,
Now,
I'm done.
Okay.
That's my question.
Fine.
That's what I wanted to hear. Now, Ms. Watson's going to have 5 minutes, and then we'll be back. Thanks. Chair recognizes Ms. Watson.
Thank you very much. I mentioned a bill that I had called the Chomp Act, and it stands for Consumers Have Options for Molar Protection. First letter of each word spells chomp, and we chomp on food. Your organization came out in opposition to my bill, the Chomp Act, because the ADA believes that mercury amalgam is safe. However, the Chomp Act addresses important consumer knowledge. Do you believe dentists should tell every patient that amalgam is mainly mercury?
The testimony that I have prepared and what I've been prepared to talk
yes,
about
no,
has to do
no.
with the MOU. And
Can you answer my question very specifically?
No, I can't answer your question because I am not the person at the ADA who has responded to you. We can respond in writing.
Let me ask it again and listen to it very carefully. If I'm not speaking clearly, just let me know. Do you believe dentists should tell every patient that amalgam is mainly mercury? Yes? No?
You mean me personally? You're asking?
Do you, Mr. Walsh,
Just as Mr. Walsh.
do you believe that dentists should ask that question or tell the patients that amalgam is mainly mercury?
I think I'd have to know more about the issue than I do.
All right. If not, state in what circumstances should dentists withhold from patients that amalgam is mainly mercury?
I'm not aware of any circumstance in which dentists withhold that information.
Can you think of a time when they should tell their patients what amalgam is composed on and what percentages of mercury is in amalgam?
This is not something I'm either
aware.
qualified to or prepared
You're not
to
aware.
respond.
You're not aware? Yes, no.
It's not a question I am capable or qualified to answer.
Or are you capable or qualified to know what's amalgam? What is an amalgam?
I do know what amalgam is, yes.
Okay. Do you know the percentages of what makes up the amalgam?
Yes.
Okay. Is amalgam 50% mercury?
On average, yes.
Okay. Do you think a person should know that amalgam is 50% mercury?
That's beyond my preparation for this meeting.
Is
and I'd have to
mercury
think-
safe?
The FDA has said mercury and amalgam
Is mercury
use is
safe?
Well, you have to look at the use, the exposure to determine it. In certain uses, it's not safe. In other uses, at least government agencies
let
have
me
found
see.
it to be
Maybe
safe.
I don't really speak clearly, so let me speak real clearly. You have a 9-year-old child in the dental chair, and you're going to fill that cavity in that child's mouth. The mother is sitting right outside the door, or maybe inside, because no one likes to go to the dentist. And if the mother would ask the dentist, you know, what are you putting in my child's mouth? Do you think the dentist should tell that mother what's going in the mouth? We're talking about professionals.
If I were asked the question, I would answer the question. But you're asking.
We're
it in a
talking
policy
about a
context.
professional dentist, DDS, and the mother wants to know what is going in the child's mouth. What do you think? Who do you represent?
I represent the American Dental Association on
Okay, if you
amalgam
represent-
wastewater issues.
Okay, I'll accept that. Okay, now something goes in that amalgam, and when they finish, they usually give you some water and you spit it out. It becomes wastewater, goes out to the sewage plant, and then it goes into the ocean. Now, if you were asked by a parent, is there anything in there that will put my child at risk? You think a dentist should say yes, no? Apparently, you're having trouble with these questions. Let me go on.
The question. Okay, go on.
I do understand that historically.
The gentlelady's time, it's expired, but you can ask your question.
Okay, I'll just ask this one, and I'll leave it alone. But I think we are getting the picture. I think we're getting a picture here. And we're talking about a toxic substance. I do understand that historically mercury fillings have been labeled silver fillings because of their color. Is that something you understand?
I've heard and used that phrase, yes.
Okay. However, that title is no longer relevant, and it no longer fits, and is desperately in need of a scientific update. Why does the ADA insist on using the term silver fillings to describe amalgam rather than more appropriately referring to mercury fillings? And why doesn't the ADA advocate for implementation of the recognized best practice of calling these fillings mercury fillings? Now, you represent the ADA. Can you tell us?
The witness can
what they
answer the
think?
question, and then we're
Yeah.
going to complete this round.
I think the ADA can answer that question in writing. Again, that's not within the area in which I represent them.
Are
But
you
they can-
refusing to answer verbally?
I'm saying I'm not the one that knows the answer, so
But you're representing the ADA.
I'm representing them, as I said in my opening
I yield
statement,
back.
based on
I yield
amalgam wastewater issues.
Well, let me pick up where the gentlelady left off, and that is that you heard the question answered or asked, and I would like to see an answer in writing.
We will.
I appreciate you being here. Until myself and my colleagues get answers, definitive answers to these questions, we're not going to be able to put this issue to rest. And we'll be coming back and back and back. I mean,
We'll be happy to answer all of those questions.
That's why, you know, we're hoping these hearings are going to...
Mr. Chairman, would you yield so I can ask you a question? I would hope that if we do another hearing, we will require someone who is a professional dentist from the ADA rather than the attorney, because the questions I'm asking really should be responded to by a professional.
Well, I'll ask staff to take to be mindful of your request.
Maybe we can put it in writing and see if we can get somebody, not the attorney, who can't speak for
Mr. Walsh is aware of the rules that this committee has to produce witnesses, so you know you can facilitate that working with the committee, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kane, in your testimony you conclude that, quote, EPA's estimate understates emissions of mercury from human cremation. Your own scientific work estimates the true emissions to be about at least 7 times the estimate from EPA. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Is the problem of mercury air emissions by crematoria likely to increase, decrease, or stay the same, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I agree with Mr. Reindl that over the next 10 years it will increase. I think over the much longer term it will decrease as a result of better dental care and the reduced need for dental amalgam fillings. But for the next decade it will certainly increase.
Mr. Reindl, what's the European research about mercury air emissions from crematoria showing?
I would agree with what Mr. Kane had said. The peak appears to be forecast to occur about 2020, and after that period of time, it will start to decrease.
So does mercury in the teeth of deceased persons amount to a significant source of air emissions from crematoria?
In my opinion, yes, a very significant source.
Going back to Mr. Kane, your paper in the Journal of Industrial Ecology was published in 2007. But you've been presenting your work since 2005 at scientific conferences, and isn't that right?
That's correct.
And in those years, did your work ever have an impact on EPA's official air emissions inventory?
No, it did not.
Now, EPA has informed us that they're in a process. That was the word that Ms. Stoner used, process of developing an automated internet-based procedure of receiving actual emission measurements and calculating with them by algorithm emissions factors in a dynamic way. Before my staff spoke with you about that, have you ever heard from anyone in the EPA that the agency was revamping its emissions inventory in this way?
No, I had not.
And do you think, based on what you know so far, that this new procedure is assured of getting the air emissions from mercury from crematoria right, or are possible complications or are there possible complications that could compromise the new inventory system?
I think there are complications. I mean, certainly to have additional stack testing would be a beneficial thing. I think for some of the reasons I stated in my testimony, you need to be careful that the stack testing is representative and that it's probably a good idea to not rely entirely on stack tests, but also to look at techniques such as looking at how much mercury is actually going into the crematory, which is easier to do than to measure the mercury coming out.
So what are some of the other difficulties that could get in the way of the EPA's new system of emission factors accurately determining emission factors for mercury air emissions from crematoria and sludge incinerators?
I think the biggest problem is getting representative samples for emissions tests. The other problem is that mercury air emissions testing is difficult to do. It's easier to make mistakes. I mean, it's fairly easy to count fillings in a person's mouth, but more difficult to measure micrograms of mercury per cubic meter of air. So I think it would require a lot of air emissions testing.
So what questions do you think Congress should be pursuing with EPA to ensure that there are new air mercury emissions from crematoria aren't as mistaken as the old estimates?
I would think that asking EPA to consider all the available evidence, both stack testing and other types of evidence, would be appropriate.
Mr. Reindl, do you have any comment on that?
Well, besides the comments that Mr. Kane made about the difficulty in measuring the stack emissions, what we have found through literature review is actually much of the mercury doesn't go through the stack, and that they have found that the mercury emissions actually in the office of the crematoria are higher than the emissions outside, suggesting that the emissions are not going necessarily up the stack, but are going through leaks, if you will, in the actual cremation unit. And so measuring the emissions from the stack is going to be very, very difficult. Another point to note is that there is no crematorium in the country that is required to have any air emission controls whatsoever. We have almost no data on an ongoing basis from any crematorium. The one crematoria that was used 10 years ago had mainly just a water spray system to reduce some of the dust, but there is no other emissions control on any crematorium in the country otherwise.
Thank you. Just to staff, one of the things that occurs to me is that as the EPA is going through this process, we should call to the EPA's attention experts who are available, who have done research that might enable their process to be enriched by that research. Yeah, even especially ones who work there. And I'm just a thought. Chair recognizes Ms. Watson.
Mr. Brown, you've heard my line of questioning, and you heard the responses that have come from Mr. Walsh. Can you help us understand the position of the ADA? Do you know anything about the American Dental Association and their opposition to the amalgam fillings, the silver fillings?
I don't. In fact, it pains me to have to say I have sort of the same answer that Mr. Walsh did. I can talk to you about the environmental disposition of the mercury once it leaves the dental office.
Okay, well, can you?
Not the
please?
rest. I mean,
maybe that's something that might be compelling as we try to gather more evidence and try to change the ADA's position about amalgams.
Yes, ma'am.
The environmental impact, because we all know that the waste goes to the sewer management and then out into the ocean. And we just heard the emissions, and there is no way or they have not come up with a way to capture and to change the particles in the emissions. They go out into the environment. Can you help us?
Well, one of the things that preparation for this hearing and listening to the testimony is, it occurs to me that I need to go back and ask the Quicksilver Caucus if it has any recommendations to ECOS about incinerators, the mercury emissions from crematoria, because that's not an issue that, I mean, we're aware of it and we've looked at it, but we don't have a position on it, and it strikes me that we need to have one.
All right, Mr. Kane, can you help us?
I can note on the question of controlling mercury emissions from incinerators that one of the states in Region 5, Minnesota, has worked on a voluntary basis with the Mortuary Association in the state and the University of Minnesota, and they have come up with a goal of reducing mercury emissions from crematoria by 75%. And there's a variety of alternatives that they're going to look at, including alkaline hydrolysis or pulling or dechlorinating teeth prior to cremation.
Yeah. I am aware and of many substances, Mr. Brown, that can be used in place of the mercury in the amalgam. And I was told by the National Dental Association that, oh, they're too expensive and people will stop coming and bringing their children or coming in for fillings because of the cost. Do you know of any of the substitutes? Does anyone at the table here? Mr. Walsh, you can't speak professionally. You just told me that, so I'll refer this to other panelists, maybe Mr. Rydell. Do you know of the separators? Yes. And Mr. Rydell, can you tell us how we can protect from further pollution of our environment because of the mercury sewage?
Well, speaking on the cremation issue, obviously there are two ways to deal with it. One is to remove the teeth prior to cremation, and the other is to control the mercury emissions during the process or use an alternative process such as the alkali hydrolysis process. One of the challenges that Minnesota is facing is that they're not sure of what technology can help them meet their goal as for stack emissions. And as I mentioned before, not all the emissions go through the stack. So that is a very big challenge.
So we still need more research, is what you're saying.
We still need more research, and when your chair noted to staff that EPA ought to involve experts on the cremation issue, I raised my hand to make a note that unfortunately we don't have many experts on this. When I have been doing this literature and survey and contacting people in the field for over 10 years, I have never found anybody at a university in North America that has worked on this. I have never found anybody in the entire world that has done such a survey of references on cremation. And in fact, some of the people that I was in contact with in Germany and Norway are no longer involved in it. There simply aren't any experts
I hear you
in this
loud
field.
and clear. I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this hearing, and I just appreciate the chair for allowing me to take part in this hearing. I'm on the subcommittee too, because mercury is a toxic substance that can do harm. And I am just shocked that professionals don't understand the harm that mercury can do in a filling, and they are still calling these silver fillings. You know, people like gold fillings and silver and so on. And I think these misstatements and holding back this information is very harmful to the health. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just end by saying this. I'm about this for improving our environment and keeping Americans healthy. And people who only consider the money that comes out of this profession from doing this, I think are an abomination to society. I am concerned about the health of young people. I'm a victim. And when we come and we bring professionals to this panel, and they're not straightforward and honest to us and do not want to share with the public has a right to know about anything that is inserted in their bodies. And it's a proven fact that mercury is a very toxic substance. And I would hope that the dentists would understand and would have the knowledge, Mr. Rendell, of, how they are polluting the wastewater. And I would hope that they would not send an attorney who really doesn't understand the chemicals and the ingredients and what makes up an amalgam here to testify in front of this committee, and particularly when I'm on it, because I don't buy it. And, we've been studying this, Mr. Chairman, for years. And so I'd like a professional in front of me that can tell me what they put into a person's mouth, and we'll share that information. We fought for years to get the warnings on smoking, and now, almost on everything you buy in a market, you can find out the ingredients in there. And if you have allergies to peanuts, you better know there's peanuts in that candy bar you give to a kid, because they can kill you. And if you're a professional medical person and you don't know, you're just as guilty as somebody who put a gun to their head. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from California for her participation in this hearing and all the other members who participated. This is the Domestic Policy Subcommittee of Oversight and Government Reform. Today's hearing is assessing EPA's efforts to measure and reduce mercury pollution from dentist offices. We've had two panels of witnesses. I want to thank the panel in front of us for their participation. This committee will continue to retain jurisdiction over this matter related to various types of mercury toxicity and their circulation in the broader society. As you can see, there are members of this subcommittee, myself included, who have very strong feelings on this. It's noteworthy because, as chairman, I rely very closely on how the members of my committee feel about what we should pay attention to. So that having been said, to the best of your ability to help us move this along to compliance and to protect the public health, be much appreciated. So with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.